Before we get started, I want to just take a moment to point out something that might get overlooked otherwise. It is hard to stand in front of 200 people staring at you, regardless of age. Ask people what their greatest fear is. Public speaking is right up there in the top 3. To have 4 children to stand up, face you all, and speak their faith with words as well as they did. Can we just give them a round of applause? There are churches that by design do not allow children under about age 12 to be in big people's worship service. They are somewhere else on the campus. We've never abided by that. We believe that children learn by being part of the larger community of faith, and their understanding grows as their ability to understand grows. I'm grateful for our children being seen and heard. Amen? We defy gravity. We defy the culture when we step into countercultural decisions like these. This month, we're focusing on defying gravity of another kind, and that is our gravity of a culture of more that says it's all about me. Everybody else can kind of take care of themselves. And the statistics are bearing that out, that folks are believing what the culture is teaching us, that it is finally to look out for me and no one else. We're working to push against that in ways that are significant, but most importantly, are godly. Today, we have a really long set of verses. 1. It's from Matthew's gospel, and it's Jesus speaking, and it goes like this. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. Let's pray. Dear and gracious God, we thank you for all the grace that you pour into every moment, every breath of our lives. Enable us, oh God, to hear the grace there and to respond with gratitude that makes you smile and serves others. In Jesus' name, amen. Years ago, just 10 or so years after the Wright brothers lifted off at Kitty Hawk by the grace of God called Wind, in the 1920s, Raymond Ortega put out a challenge. The challenge was anybody that could fly nonstop from New York to Paris, he would give $25,000. That's a sizable sum, even today. But today, it would be $396 plus thousands of dollars. So nearly $400,000 as incentive to anybody that could figure out something that had never been done before, a defying of gravity that would be as mind-boggling then as going to the moon was in the 1960s. Just unimaginable. But there were 3 who stepped forward right away and said, I want to collect on that money. One of them was René Fonck. René Fonck was a World War I fighter ace, and he was from Paris. And he thought it would be great fun to take a steamer over to New York and then fly back to his hometown and be a hometown hero again. So René got some backing, and he began to put together what he wanted inside his plane. And René got together with some friends and decided what he really wanted inside the plane was some mahogany furniture. That included a huge table and chairs so he and the other crew members could sit at it. He had a huge couch that could fold up out into a bed. He had a huge mahogany warming cabinet because he had a hotel develop and deliver the very best of meals, steak tartare, roast duck, and put it in a warming unit inside the mahogany cabinet. He had, by the end of the checklist, he was 8,000 pounds over the weight that the plane was designed to take up into the air. Not surprisingly, even at full throttle, with him and his crew, they got to the end of the runway, ran out of runway, went over a short incline, lurched forward, wings broke off, it burst into flames. Fonck and one other got out, the other two did not. The second was Charles Levine. Charles was a showman. He loved the limelight. And he had the idea that if I could bring enough publicity to this project, which I'm undergirding, he was a multimillionaire, that the fame will outlast my life. So, in order to draw up a little bit of drama, he picked two pilots. And he told them that he would select one of them after they would work together right up to the point of liftoff. Well, because they had their own egos, they began working together, but not so well. They got into fights over the plane's design. They got over into fights about the flight plan. And leading up to the actual day they were to lift off, Levine came back and said, okay, meet me on the runway the night before. I need you guys to sign a contract. And they showed up. And the contract said, one of you is going to fly tomorrow morning, but you get none of the proceeds of the publicity from this thing. I get all of that. They had to sign away their rights. Bertard, one of the pilots, said, heck with that, filed a legal injunction against Levine, and the plane never got off the ground the next day. There was a third person that thought $25,000 might help his creature comforts of life. You may have heard of him, Charles Lindbergh. Charles was a pilot with absolutely exacting judgment on the way things needed to be successful. He monitored the construction of the Spirit of St. Louis while it was still in the factory. He made the decision it would have one engine. He made the decision there'd be nothing extra in the plane, just enough food to supply him, the solo person on that plane. He became famous for trying to lighten the load everywhere he could, to the point where he was cutting the edges off his navigational charts because he didn't need the extra weight of the extra paper that didn't have writing on it. He decided to have no windshield. It was too heavy. Instead, he worked with a periscope that went up to look forward, and he had two side windows that allowed him to look sideways. 33 and a half hours after Charles Lindbergh took off of New York, he landed May 19th, 1927 in Paris, to the throng of supporters who cheered Lucky Lindy for having done the unimaginable. Now, you know, there was no luck to it. This was the result of a decision that he had made, a plan carefully carried out and executed to near perfection. With 45% of Americans not giving anything to any charitable organization, it begs the question, how do they move to a different place in their lives? Because I don't believe they don't want to be generous. I don't believe that they don't have hearts that want to care, but they apparently find an inability to move past the gravitational field of more to less. An inability to lighten their load along the way. I think amongst the 45%, many find themselves to be like Renee Fonck. They just like the stuff, and it weighs them down, and it prevents them from ever getting above that which they've only known and feel so very attached to. Others, like the two pilots that argued with each other about every design feature and about the flight plan, are like a lot of couples I know, who argue about the finances, where it's going to go, who's going to make the decisions on what. And they're never able to overcome the gravitational pull of their respective financial gravity that pulls them down and pulls them apart. No, if folks who do overcome, who want to be generous, who think of themselves as generous, they're like Lindbergh, who made a decision, who put out a plan, and then executed a plan. This, as it turns out, is exactly what financial planners have been telling us for decades. I went and checked with mine this past week to make sure that what I said to you is still on solid ground. It turns out that which I've been telling folks for 30 years is still the same information. It just hasn't changed, largely because we have a difficult time changing the way we think about our stuff, the way we think about everything that God pours into our lives. But every financial planner, yours included, would say there's 3 keys to overcoming gravity, financial gravity. One, you just have to make a decision that this is important. 68% of Americans don't have a will. And without a will, the state is going to get a big chunk of everything you own at the time you come to go say hello to the Lord in person. 68%. That hasn't changed in the last 30 years. Number one, you got to make a decision that, like Lindbergh, we decide that to be generous, to think ahead, and to plan for what is ahead is essential. That it's important for God, it's important for those that we love, it's important for our families. Because once we make a decision and we say this is of primary importance, guess what? Your subconscious starts to go to work even when you don't realize it's working. It begins to come up with ideas, it becomes to come up with strategies that allows you to fulfill the goal that we have put out there for ourselves and those that we love. It's why Paul says, tell them to do good. Tell them, as he's saying to Timothy, his intern, if you will, tell them to do good and to be rich in the good things that they do, so that they might be generous and share with others. Timothy was a head of the early church. These were instructions for a leader of the early church. Do good, be rich in the good things you do, and be generous and share with others. That doesn't happen unless a decision is made. First. Second. Number two, a key to success in terms of managing that which God pours into our lives, like Lindbergh, you make a plan. And you begin to work the plan. You stay with the plan based on the decision that you've made. It's why we handed out this handy little sheet last week. There are extras available at the welcome desk if you didn't get one. It's a really easy way, handy way to look at, wow, where does my money go? I'm not even sure. And once we see where our money is going, to say, well, how might I want to do that differently? I don't really want to be part of the 45% who give nothing. I want to be part who decide to give something because God is important. My family is important. I want to do right by both. It's why I counsel young couples. I said, darn it, you asked a pastor to do your wedding. You didn't know you got an economics major from college. You're going to get my 20-minute stump speech on financial planning whether you want it or not, because it's just that important for your marriage. And I go on to tell them, if you're a Christian and you take Christ seriously and you take God's grace seriously, then you're going to work biblically toward 10%. You do right by God. 10% is 10%. That's the tithe. That's the definition. Gross or net, I'll let you make that call. But most Christians struggle to get there, but start somewhere. Start somewhere would be the injunction of Paul, and to be generous in that. Number two, I'll tell folks, 15%. 15% of your gross you put away for your future, because that's important, to take care of your family, to take care of yourself in your retirement years, when only 3% of Americans are able to retire and not have to work full time. Only 3% of Americans reach that goal. Put away 15% starting right now. Right now. You do right by God, you do right by your future, and now you can have a spiritual and a financial peace of mind that you've put the priorities in play the way God calls us to put them in play, because we are charged to care for our families. It's a lot like Miss Margaret. Remember the video last week? Depression era, about the same time as Lindbergh. She didn't have 2 nickels, literally, to rub together. But she decided that along with the other women of the church, she was a single mom with 4 kids, we're going to figure out a way to join in the collective offering of the church. And so picked up odd jobs, they did without some things. And over the course of weeks, they figured out with pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters that they were able to give along with everybody else in the church to a higher cause than just themselves. It's hard work. It's hard to balance the needs of ourselves, the needs of our families, the needs of our future, and the needs of the church to do what we all want to do. Here's a video that gives a sense of just how difficult that balancing act is. See where you identify with it as you think about planning your own financial needs and wants. Take a look.
I'm gonna go through the safety briefing real quick so I can get you in the trees as quick as possible. So you'll have 2 clips on you, and one of them is always gonna be locked and one is always gonna be unlocked. And this is so that you're always locked into the course. You cannot detach from the course at any point until you're on the ground, basically. So this is the key that will allow you to move throughout the course and stay safely attached at all times. So the way this works is you're gonna get your unlock clip, put it over the cable, slide it under here and get that little barrel piece and push it up in there, and you'll hear a click, and now you are safely attached to the course. I'm coming to my first bridge or element, and we'll find another tweezle. Put your clip on, attach, and now you can walk across the bridge. If at any point you are to slip off the bridge, your clips will catch you and you will be fine. Bonsai! Woo!
Anybody ever been on a high ropes challenge course? We had a bunch of hands at the earlier service. Is that not just one of the scariest things you've ever done in your life? Absolutely terrifying. And if you got vertigo, I'll pray for you because you think you're going to die. What did you hear in the short video? The overlap, the connection between navigating a high ropes course and navigating your own family's financial goals. One of the things that stuck out for me was the talk about a carabiner, that clip. And what he was very careful to say, the instructor, is that you put the carabiner right here on this cable. That way you will always be on course and you will be fine. You'll always be on course and you will be fine. And to test that, I heard the collective, when he leaned back, right? And it caught him. That's who God is for us. And that's what a financial plan called a budget is for us. It's the carabiner that keeps us connected to the course so that we will be fine. To be sure, there's going to be times you slip. Not because you want to, because circumstances pulls you off the cable. But if you got the carabiner in place, both God and a plan, then you will be fine. You're not going to go down. Others will be grounded because they didn't, like Charles Lindbergh, plan ahead. They didn't devise a budget. They didn't depend on God's grace to be sufficient for their needs. But when we do, when we put away our percentage for God, and everyone can give a percentage. Everyone can give a percentage. We give away a percentage for God, and we work toward the tithe, and we execute a budget, then we find ourselves like those folks, defying gravity. And when you've already set aside from the beginning 15 to 25% of your income for God and for your future, then guess what? That leaves you 80, 75% of your income to live on, which means you live more simply by default. Kirsten and Greg are two friends of ours who, he's a retired nurse anesthetist, made more money than God, I'm pretty sure, but they didn't know where it went. And they were taking extravagant trips and they were buying extravagant toys, and it bothered them that they didn't know where it was going. And so they took Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University, which Jim Carrillo, one of our longtime members, is a huge proponent of, and for good reason. They have a youth version now. And they took the course and were so sold on this idea that you could make a decision, that you could make a plan and follow the plan. And it seems archaic, and it works. That they would actually have cash that they would put into envelopes toward the priorities that they deemed most important. And they said, well, God's most important in our lives. And so that went into the first envelope. And then money went into the second envelope for the debt of the house and the debt of the car and so on and so forth. They got to the end, and what's left for us to go play? Well, it was a lot less than what they'd been doing before. But the sense of joy, the sense of peace that they were doing right by God, doing right by their future, and living on the rest gave them incredible satisfaction. I know when Cammie and I went through our first stewardship emphasis 37 years ago, we were both full-time school, we'd just gotten married, we were in an apartment, and we were both pretend pastors. That is to say, we were interns. And because the church was having an emphasis like this, and we were on staff now at First Church Out, we thought, well, we gotta, step it up a little bit. How do we do that? Well, the average gift from most families in the United States at that time was about 2.5% of their giving, 2.5% of their income. We said, well, we're Christian. We got to be a little better than that, a little better. We can't do 10. Can't. But we could start at 4. So when we were just married, we started at 4% of our income. And each year we would add 1% until by the time 6 years later, we were giving a full tithe. And you know what? We didn't miss any vacations. We just vacationed a little closer to home, and cars have a couple 100,000 miles on them, and you make clothes go farther, and you just don't eat out as much. And we've been nothing but blessed. But it started with a challenge within the church to make a decision to be generous, develop a plan, and then work the plan. And you live more simply on the rest, but you live more joy-filled because you're taking care of your church, you're taking care of God, you're taking care of your family and your retirement. Only 3% of Americans get to that place by the time they're 65, 66, only 3%. The other 97 have to work half-time or full-time in order to maintain the lifestyle to which they become accustomed. And this just hasn't changed. We can choose differently. I'm going to give us a challenge as a church. You've got the little help budget piece you can work with, but I want to challenge us to take a look at how we spend our money. As I said last week, you take a look at your credit card bills, your debit card bills, you're going to find dead money in there. Dead money meaning it's going to places you forgot it was going for things that you don't use or don't particularly value. I want to challenge everybody in our church to figure out where the dead money is and to make that a streaming thing for God. Put a subscription. It's called an estimate of giving. Transfer the Disney. I quit using Disney. It was getting way too expensive with ESPN. But I can rechannel that to God through this church. I know the value we get because of that gift. Where's the dead money? Figure it out, put it on an estimate of giving card, and bring it back next Sunday because we're going to gather at the communion rails for communion and to bring our joint affirmations of God's grace in our lives to share together for what God's calling us to do as a people. That, as Paul says to Timothy, that we might have life and have it more abundantly. Jim Carrillo is, as I mentioned, one of our huge advocates for not only Dave Ramsey and not only putting God first, but it's not where he started. It's not at all where he started. And he has, I think, a helpful word for us. Let's take a look at his witness this morning.
My name is Jim Carrillo, and I've been a member of FUMC Plano for almost 18 years. I think this is the part of my embracing Christianity that I kind of pushed off the longest.
After this.
Really didn't think that this was something that was going to have the effect on my life the way it did. And initially I thought it was going to be more of a guilt situation, but as I started taking tiny steps towards giving more and more towards the church, what I found was it actually made me feel more comfortable as a Christian, and now I feel great knowing the causes that I'm able to contribute to financially to the church. I think there's two things that have me really excited this year. First is the potential land sale and I think about the potential to significantly reduce our debt. I think of the church budget as very similar to our personal budgets, and when you're paying a significant amount of your income towards debt, it prevents you from spending that money on things that are really a priority for you and things that you really care about. Obviously for our church, it's things like being able to help others and worshiping God. My biggest hope would be to dramatically increase our participation levels across the church membership. As a denomination and as Christians as a whole, it's a relatively small percentage of Christians that actually have a recorded giving each year. I would really love for more people to be able to experience what I've been able to have in terms of taking that first baby step towards giving on a recurring basis.